One of my earliest memories of immigrating to the United States was my first week of school in January 1979, the month that we arrived from the Soviet Union. Any 6-year-old would feel anxious about starting their first day of school in the middle of the school year. But imagine the added challenge of standing in front of your classmates for the first time wearing a blue button-down Oxford, brown corduroy pants, a red polyester ascot, and the Soviet version of a Dorothy Hamill bowl cut. Imagine also not speaking or understanding a single word of English. My first grade teacher wanted to create a completely immersive experience for me, and she demanded that I ask to go to the bathroom in English only. And because "мне нужно в туалет" doesn't sound anything like "I need to go to the bathroom," that was the very first phrase that I learned in my new country. If that did not cement my status as a refugee, if that was not enough, my grandmother would come take me up from school every single day, dressed in Russian garb from head to toe, carrying a jar of water so that I could rinse my hands before snacking on a chicken cutlet on my walk home from school. And to top off this very exciting week in my new country, an office administrator in my school came to my classroom and in front of all of the students and the teacher announced that the check my parents had written for my lunch plan had bounced. And this was my debut at PS 175 in Rego Park, Queens, where we had settled after a 4-month journey from Kiev to Vienna to Rome and finally to New York. And that week I made a resolution that would be my goal for the next decade. I needed to become an American, and I needed to assimilate as fast as I possibly could. When I told my parents about my awful first week of school and how dreadful my life was turning out to be, they had a pretty typical response. They said, "It could be worse." And no one knew that better than they did. Their Russian toughness had brought them on a very challenging journey from the oppression of communism to the land of freedom and opportunity. In their youth, they had survived poverty and persecution and sometimes near starvation. In their college years, in the city of Perm, they survived the city itself, which was called the Gateway to Siberia and the last stop to nowhere. And most importantly, they survived a 1.5 years of waiting and planning and waiting for permission to leave the Soviet Union so they could come here. And when they finally did arrive to the United States with just a few $100s and the crushing responsibility of caring for their elderly parents and their young child, their life really didn't get that much easier. My mother, who has a degree in biochemistry, a master's degree in biochemistry, took 2 jobs right away. One was at a greeting card factory where she worked for $1.25 an hour, and the other was as a lab technician in a hospital in the Bronx, where she was often seen crossing the picket line just to make ends meet. And my father, who has a degree as a mechanical engineer, took a job as a draftsman, which is a job that's usually reserved for recent college graduates. So my complaints about my first week of school really didn't garner much sympathy from my parents. But to my young and very immature mind, everything that made me feel so different was humiliating. And pretty much everything about my life was embarrassing to me and made me feel like I didn't fit in. From my parents' thick Russian accents to their beloved Buick Regal that they drove with such pride despite its beat-up appearance after it had been stolen and then recovered 8 different times from the streets of Rego Park. But I yearned to be an American. I wanted to eat pizza and French fries and hot dogs, not mashed potato pierogies and chicken cutlets and borscht. I wanted to wear Jordache jeans and Esprit sweatshirts and EG socks, not the clothes from the sales rack at Alexander's. I wanted to get my hair cut at a real hair salon, not in the living room of our neighbor's apartment. And even as a teenager, I was so desperate to shed my persona as an immigrant. I developed a real fondness for 1980s style, those misshapen, oversized, low-quality clothing from stores like Contempo Casuals and the Rainbow Shops. And my mother called them schmatas, and every time I emerged from my room dressed in one of these outfits from head to toe, she would look me up and down, give me a death stare, as only a Russian woman could do, and say the one word that would send me scurrying back to my room to change, "Niet." And finally, she had to introduce me to her secret weapon, which was also proof that she had finally arrived in the United States and the land of opportunity. And that place was Loehmann's. And it was there, in the communal dressing room of Loehmann's, where I mingled with the very fancy and stylish, but very underfunded women of Queens, that I learned about the importance of a garment made in France or in Italy, or the power of a strong shoulder pad in a perfectly tailored Escada blazer. Unfortunately, this new wardrobe did not help me assimilate at all, because in a sea of neon and acid wash, I was dressed like a middle-aged woman. But some things stay with you forever, and to this day, I love the look of a nice blazer. And thankfully, my age has caught up with my style. So many years later, when there were no longer any telltale signs of being an immigrant, and I finally felt and looked and spoke like a real New Yorker, I met the man that I was going to marry. And he was born in New York City, but his parents were Cuban, who had fled as refugees in the early 1960s. And as our relationship became more serious, we realized that they need to meet. Our parents finally need to meet. And so this was a meeting that had very high stakes, because as any immigrant will tell you, when you marry somebody, you marry their whole family. And so it had to go well. We were both only children. This was it. And so we picked a restaurant on the Upper East Side where we both lived, and I went with a pit in my stomach, and I thought, my parents' Russian accents and the traces of the Russian culture were going to be so embarrassing, as they always have been. And he was worried that they would have nothing in common, and what would they talk about, and would we just sit together in awkward silence? And we finally get there, the day has arrived, we sit down, they make some small talk, and the conversation naturally veers to their backgrounds. And before the appetizers even came out, both my parents and his parents started singing the exact same communist song that they had learned in their youth in their own respective languages, pretty loudly. And as that embarrassment started to bubble up inside me once again, I looked at these two couples who had come from opposite sides of the world, who couldn't be more different, laughing together and bonding and having much more in common than I ever thought. And I thought to myself that whether you're a first generation American or third generation American, we are all immigrants. And our unique stories don't tear us apart, they actually bring us much closer together. Thank you.